Welcome to the Conjugate Nation podcast.
Okay, we are back and raring to go. So with today, before we get started, you are listening to Jess Bufano, which is myself. You can find me on Instagram at Jess Bufano. This is your chance, Chris.
This is Chris McDonald. You can find me at Rubicon CF.
And I'm Shane Sweat. You can find me at Sweatshop Cincinnati on Instagram.
All of us you can find on Conjugate Nation Podcast on YouTube. We don't have social media for the podcast past that yet. We're all pretty maxed out and busy. So we're doing the best we can. But you can most certainly check us out. We do try to get a little bit of extra content up on the YouTube channel. We are going to push this year to try to get even more of that. Along those lines, if you are enjoying the podcast, we're 7 episodes in now. If you're enjoying it, it costs you nothing, but does make a huge difference to us if you can subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us individually on Instagram, and like the things when you get the chance. If you actually like them. If you do not, you do not have to. Anything like that is helpful. Sharing the content, posting questions, or anything you've got for feedback into comments, or reaching out to us directly. We're all happy to answer as many or help as many people as we can when we've got the time. So if there's anything we can do for you, just reach out. We'll do our best we can. Otherwise, to be thankful, shout outs to John Turin at Glass City CrossFit, Dan Wales at Beyond the 40 podcast, and Vincent Ramos. All those people have kind of shared our content, reached out with positive feedback or constructive feedback that's definitely helping make us better, and been super supportive of what we're up to. So you are appreciated. With today, we are going to talk about the application of the conjugate system to more sports-specific athletes. So starting with an athlete reaches out to you, you set up a time for them to come in the gym, and from the moment they walk in, the sort of game is afoot. Shane, what's the things that are going through your mind initially when you're meeting an athlete for the first time who's interested or beginning their first sort of session with you?
Okay, so really for me, the first thing I do is when they walk in, I like to watch them walk in. Okay, I know it sounds really weird, but are both their feet pointed straight ahead? Is one turned out? Is one turned in? Are both turned out or turned in? Is the shoulder dropped? Is there anything that I see structurally with them that shows me that they have joint dysfunction or they have weaknesses in muscle groups that's affecting their movement quality? Because no matter what the athlete does for a sport, I need their movement quality flawless, right? So the first thing I like to do is watch that. And the reason why is, one, it already starts to let me know what accessories I might be doing with them to fix the issues that I see coming up and what I want to dive into. Also, when I do notice something, because I've been doing this for a while and I see something, I can point it out to an individual and ask them different questions about what that might make them feel like or other potential irritations or injuries they've had. And there's a reason why I do that. One, it keeps me sharp and it keeps me tuned in right from the beginning. The other thing is it's really important for an athlete to believe in the coach that they have. So I've had people come into my gym as an example, and I had a CrossFit athlete come into my gym, and they walked in, and right off the bat, I was like, how long has your shoulder been bothering you? 2.5 years. How'd you know that? Like, well, the right shoulder's dropped down, pulled forward. I see your pecs kind of balled up and tight, which means I know your hips tilted, your lats getting pulled on, and your pec and pec minor tighten up to try to pull the shoulder tight into the socket to stabilize it. And so that was kind of the thing. Like, well, I've been looking for a new coach. I've had the same coach for 3 years, and they've never even recognized there's a problem with my shoulder. And they were surprised that I recognized something and broke it down and explained exactly what they felt like, just with seeing them for 30 seconds, right? And it's not a parlor trick or anything. It's just if you're around movement and athletes long enough, you know how an individual is supposed to move. But I need that athlete to buy in because I'm going to give them hard work, and most people aren't going to want to do the hard work that I give them. But if I buy them in, they're more likely to stick around long enough to really start to see the gains come out and see the benefit of that. So at that point, I like to talk to them about their sport. What's the sport they do? What are they good at? What are they not good at in their sport? If they have any video or anything, I love to see it. But because everybody's a little bit different, right? You know, you take a 100-meter sprinter, you have a person who's the fastest in the world at 20 meters, but they don't win the 100, right? So it's like, you know, maybe they're plenty fast out of the blocks. Maybe they're the fastest in their, you know, in their division or the age group or whatever, in those blocks, right, coming out of the blocks for the first 10 meters. But I know to get them to the Olympics, they have to be the fastest at 70 meters. Okay. I want to elongate the acceleration phase and shorten the maintenance phase up. So I have to train an athlete to do that, right? You might have an athlete who's really good at the first 70 meters in a 100-meter sprint, but they're poor at getting out of the blocks in the first 10 meters or 20 meters they're not good at. Well, that dictates where I put my effort in, right? So when you're talking about athletes, sports are measured at speeds, okay? So I can take whether someone's running 100 meters, or if they have to run faster at 40 meters for football, for a combine, or they're a 200, 400, 800 meter runner. It doesn't matter. You know, what matters is once you know what the sport is, you know what the speeds the top individuals are playing at, and you have to be able to get into that realm. Okay. So whether it's increasing someone's strength or improving different types of speeds, whether it's like explosive power or pure speed or speed strength or strength speed or strength endurance, these are qualities that I have to figure out and see where they're lacking. So when I'm taking them through movements, I usually will start off with a main movement that is directed towards their sport. From that movement, that also lets me know what the quality of that movement tells me where their weaknesses or mobility issues are. And then I will address that to get them to move perfectly. The better they move, the better the articulation of their joints are, meaning that they have full function of the joint, means the least amount of wear and tear they can have on the body, the most efficient they're going to be in sport. So then what I'm going to do, and I recommend this to coaches who haven't spent a lot of time in this realm, take the top 5 people. If you've never trained an athlete for the sport they're doing, take the top 5 people in the world in that sport. Now you have a model of what that athlete's supposed to look like, right? So, you know, what I mean by that is when an athlete comes into me, and let's say someone comes in, they're a speed skater. They want to do, 400 meters speed skating, or whatever the distance is, doesn't matter. First, I'm going to take a look at them and say, okay, so this person has small legs and small glutes. I've never seen an Olympic speed skater with small legs and small glutes. So we're going to have to really build that up. If I've never worked with an athlete in that sport, I'm going to try to find the best coach in the world that is willing to talk to me. And I'm going to ask them, what are some of the most common attributes these athletes need? And what are the three top injuries these athletes get? Because what I want to do in that program is address the needs of the athlete, right? So first off, it might be like, hey, look, you're so new to speed skating, we can't really address extreme specifics yet. What we have to first do is get full function out of your joints, get you balanced for your sport, and optimize your leverages. So how I will do that is I will pick accessory movements, and my rep schemes are based on to give them the muscle size that I need for the leverages, right? Once the leverages get there, I can drop, like say for lower body, 20, 25 reps is great for muscle mass, right? So once I have the muscle mass where I need it to be, I drop the rep scheme. So the rep scheme's like maybe around 5 to 10 reps, depending on what we need. And now with that athlete, I can increase strength if that's what they need, right? Without increasing as much size in their lower body, because I don't want to get, it's not like I can put a bodybuilder on the ice either. And at that point, then we start getting into the farther along they go, the better they get, the more radical the actual movement can be. So meaning that you start off with basic movements and the movements might get a little higher end. They get that way because the athlete will level up and they go to different stages. And when there's different stages, new movements become available. So Jesse and Chris and I were talking about this earlier. And, I kind of made the reference of like, if you're in martial arts, right? All white belts come into martial arts, and if it's jujitsu or kickboxing, it doesn't matter. They will watch the black belt in kickboxing and want to do all the cool looking movements there, the flying knees and spin back kicks and all this stuff. They don't want to do the front kick, the side kick, teep kicks, the basics, right? I think they feel like if they can do those, like they've moved on. Well, you have that problem throughout the majority of sports, right? All the new people get into it. Once they've learned a little bit, they want to start messing around with what the high level people are doing, can get excited about it, and they want to be like those people. Well, let me tell you about those people, those world champions, world record holders, like the best in the world are also usually the best at basics. So what we find is, you have your white belt, you have certain movements that are available to you. Those movements are because that is what you should be learning within your knowledge base and your physical capacity. Then you go up to a yellow belt or purple belt or whatever the martial arts is. And then when you go up a belt, you have new movements that are unlocked for you. They're unlocked for you because you had to learn components from the other ones to be able to fully understand and utilize the new movements that are given to you. They're a higher skill set. So now you're more likely to create the balance and have a little bit of knowledge and more of understanding of how to use these new movements, how to execute them, and you have a higher skill set. And, as you go all the way up, and what you find is if you're in the stuff long enough, black belts, at some point, they revert back to the basics and they become amazing at basics. And you see some of the best boxers in the world use basic movements to win their fights. People in jiu-jitsu, it's like, hey, if you have the best guard on the planet, it makes it really hard for people to beat you. Okay. We're talking, you do a flying armbar and all kinds of cool stuff, but if you have a horrible guard and horrible basics, you're not going to do well. You'll do well against low-level people who are not athletic, but you're not going to go far. So everything's about your basics. So it's the same thing. When they come in the gym, the longer they're with me, the more problems I fix, the more I level them up, the more movement becomes available to them. Okay. And so, we might go from, as an example, optimizing the structure, the build of an athlete. So, and that might mean stripping muscle off them. You say someone comes into you and they were a local bodybuilder. Now I want to run an endurance event, ultra marathon. It's like, they're probably not going to stay looking like a bodybuilder. Okay. So we, adapt their body, fix their movement quality, teach them the basics, the foundations, get them to move flawlessly, lay out a good training structure so that, training doesn't only build you physically, build you psychologically as well. We want the training program to be a roadmap for these athletes to see why they're improving and why they'll get better. And so they start to know what you're working on and what areas you're improving without you even having to say something to them, because they can now start to see this roadmap come out because of the time they've spent with you. We'll always want to do prehab. And this is why I ask high-level coaches in those specific sports, technique coaches, what are the 3 most common injuries you see? And for this athlete who's built like this for your sport, is there anything specific about their build and their structure and the distances that they're going, or the sport they're doing, that might be a potential issue for them down the road? And then what we're going to do is we're going to put in our special exercises, we're going to put some prehab movements in there, just to make sure we don't run into those issues and those problems. Okay. Because obviously the longer we can keep an athlete in the sport, the higher chance we have of reaching the top. Right. So what I basically do is I look at the structure of an athlete. I try to get them to be structurally, get them to move perfectly, get their joints healthy and get full function on their joints. So we have optimal range of motion and we can access all the tissue that we want. And then I will leverage them for their sport. And then after I leverage them for their sport, I'm going to start looking at what specific qualities are they not good at. So, like I was talking with Rich Franklin today, is just an athlete that I trained today, and he was UFC world champion. And we were talking because it's like, he was never the fastest guy in the ring, right? He was someone who had been like an 800-meter sprinter. So that's why he had knockouts, but he could also go the distance. But there were people who were a little bit faster than him. So he had to work on footwork and had to use it. He's a very intelligent fighter, had to use that to gain his advantage. But what you want to do with an athlete like that says, okay, they're the 800-meter sprinter, right? They're not going to be the pure 100-meter sprinter. So someone's always going to be a little bit faster than them. But if I can increase their explosive power just a little bit and maintain the speed they're really good at, he had a good overall quality of speed for his sport. But there were little speeds and things we could have picked up for him that would have increased his overall effectiveness, right? So, what you do is you work on the major things first. Get someone, so they're structurally built healthy, they're optimized for their sport. And then you look at the overall quality of what they are in the sport. And then you go from the most important to the least important. So like Jesse working with Justin Medeiros, right? It's like, okay, well, where's the biggest holes for him? Fill those in first. Once you fill those in, then you're going to the minute little cracks and minute little things, and you're trying to bring those all up so they're all even. So in the ideal world, take whatever he's the best at and get him so everything else is he's just as good at. Like I'm not necessarily trying to increase what he's the best at, because if he's winning that without any problem, then we just need to increase the other things. Once they're all up, now we can continue to raise them all, So to me, it's a structural thing and it's a psychological thing. Make your connection with your athlete and structurally make a decision on the route you need to go with that athlete, and then give them the qualities they need.
I think there's a whole bunch of good points in there. And I scratched out a whole bunch of things that made me think about. From the top, information collection. So the minute that athlete's walking through the door, I think that's a great point about, it's just curious to sort of see how an athlete carries himself. Not only like how they're visually appear as they like enter the gym and facility, but also how they carry themselves. Do they immediately come off as a confident athlete? Or is someone coming in who, this is like their last stand or their last hope, or they, it gives it the way an athlete moves, can really give you some good direction with even how to approach and start a conversation with them. That as an athlete, collecting information, I think that is really a big deal from my perspective, for sure. And it's everywhere you can get information from. So that initial assessment of what that athlete moves and looks like as you start even having your first conversation. For us, same thing. We would sit down and just start talking about what they're up to, where they're at, where they feel their strengths and weaknesses lie, where they've been running into problems, what direction they've had in the past, and how that's like positively or negatively affected their training and their sports performance result. And then that kind of carries a conversation to that next stage of, based off those things, what are the next series of questions to ask? But I mean, I don't shy away from sitting from anywhere from, 10 minutes to an hour with a high performing athlete to make sure I've got as much information on them as I possibly can to then be making the best kind of choices. And I'll scratch notes down the whole time. I mean, usually a session like that would be on my time. So that's not something a high-end athlete would actually pay for, because I just want to feel like no pressure to move along. And I want to make sure I feel like I'm understanding what they're saying and then getting as much out of that as I can. But the other one for that would be other coaches. Like, are you going to work with this athlete and you're their only coach? Or are you working with this athlete now as their special strengths coach and on a team? I mean, for most of the athletes I work with, I am one of several coaches on the team. And the sort of next layer would be like, hey, can I get the contact info for your other coaches or coach? And then being able to reach out to them and be like, what are you seeing? What are your frustrations? What would make a huge difference for this athlete? And sometimes you're just like, oh man, that's great. Super easy, very tangible. This athlete needs to move X amount of weight or be, cover this amount of ground in this amount of time. So, speed, time, load, driven goals, which you're just like, then it's very attainable. They need a certain height of box jump, this level on the beep test, like whatever. And then you can start sort of breaking down and making notes about how, we would apply the conjugate system to reach those goals. Certainly I like the point, Shane, about the injuries and stuff like that. That's a huge piece that definitely definitely gets overlooked for the same reason I feel like base movement patterns get overlooked. And it's not the funnest thing you can do. Like when you look at high performing athletes and they're doing super cool stuff, as someone who's beginner, intermediate, novice in that sport, that might be like, fuck, I definitely want to get that figured out and be able to do that thing. When really you're a long ways from that being the thing that will lead to the highest return on investment, So I think, that sort of pieces of understanding, what are the injuries of sport? Because especially stuff like CrossFit, right? Like sometimes like every event you get your athlete through and have them still be super healthy is the likelihood that they do more events and stay super healthy. That's a huge, huge task in any sport. And longevity is, more years of paychecks and less, just like being able to stay in that game as long as possible. And definitely that addressing that can be things that are maybe not direct contributors to performance, versus with skiing, quads, glutes. But unless that skier has the hamstrings to balance out that knee joint, and exposure for ACL could be really high. And so understanding the injuries that that sport has, or the risks of that sport, can really set you on a path where, like, hey, here's what we're going to do to make sure we build optimize your performance and your result. Here's what we're going to do to make sure we keep you being able to continue to do that for as long as possible.
Something you're talking about that, like talking about the difference between performance gains and the difference between just doing movements to make someone healthy, right? I always tell people, like, if you have a gym, it should be an educational facility. The more you try to educate your clients, the better coach you're going to become. You regurgitate this information, it becomes set in your mind, and it makes you think about what you're saying. But as well, what I want the athlete to know is I want to know what's working for performance, what's working for injuries. Something could happen. Maybe I could get in a car accident or move, or maybe I'm not available to that athlete for whatever reason anymore. I want them to understand what they were doing, what was for health and safety, and what was for performance, because sometimes those movements that are not for performance might not be they're probably not going to be fun for them. So they're the first things they're going to want to quit. But if this athlete, say, no longer works with me, and 2-3 years down the road, they start to get a problem in an area that I talked about, they at least now know what they need to do to go back and fix it. And if they go back and that fixes it, that's a great thing for them. But become an educational facility and, talk to your athletes. We're like investigators, right? We ask questions. From those questions, we start to put together an idea of what we're going to do with this athlete. And that's why Jesse's like, we sit down and ask these questions and go through things. And so the more information we have, the better. And communication is huge. So a good relationship between an athlete and a coach requires good communication between that athlete and coach. It requires trust between that athlete and a coach. And so the more questions that you can get answered, that you have feedback for and have answers for, the better for you and the athlete.
Yeah, one of the things you guys are hitting the nail on the head, and something I've learned a lot from both of you guys, is data. I think, Jesse, you've talked about it before, just, we're exercise scientists, and so the gym is your laboratory. So, and the only way you can make educated decisions is gaining data. So, in that assessment, as much as it is in the beginning, that process never ends. That's why you're constantly tracking. You're seeing things that are going up. You're also seeing if something goes down. That's an opportunity to know, like, hey, what are we doing wrong that's, contributing to this? So looking at those, and then, the other part with, especially from the CrossFit side, if you're assessing, you've got metabolic capacities you're assessing, you've got strength that you're assessing, you've got the Olympic lifts that you're assessing, you've got skill development. And those just start to paint the picture. And I think the cool thing, and I know you guys feel the same way, is that as we can watch people at like Westside Barbell, where Louis did some of the greatest experiments, with the strongest athletes on earth, like the reality is we're not seeing that experience of a lifter come into our gym. Even the Olympic level lifters, they can't lift like those guys when they're first coming in. So be happy with the fundamentals. Like, you don't need to have all the fancy movements, hit your deads, hit your squats, hit your good mornings, hit your presses, and, keep it simple. And then as that athlete grows, as you're assessing, you're okay, like, well, this is down, let's get this up. But until you get that well-rounded data to really work with them, that's going to start to formulate how you start to attack them and plug and play in that conjugate system.
You want your athletes to feel successful too. So if I give them a radical movement way too early, they're going to bomb on it. And then they're not going to feel successful. Or maybe they were like, maybe I'm not that good of an athlete because I see all these other people in the gym. That's a big problem that we have is, I have a gym that has a high output. People walk in and there's people who lift heavy weight. They're very explosive. And so when someone comes in, you put them on a movement. If it's a pretty radical, hard, intense movement, something they've never seen before, they get all excited about it and want to do it. But if they get blown out of the water by everybody in the gym, it can deflate them, right? So everything's optimal. Whatever they need at the time is what they need. Sorry, if you need something basic, that's what you're doing. If you need something radical, that's what you're doing. But it doesn't really matter. I need to collect information. I need to level them up mentally and physically, which means that I have to bring new movements to them at optimal times. And I have to bring the types of movements to them at optimal times. It's up to a coach to, you create that working relationship with that athlete. And then once they buy into that trust, they'll wait for you to tell them what they need to do, and that's where you want to get to.
So past that initial assessment piece, so from collecting information from the athlete, collecting information from other coaching teams, collecting information from that initial sort of visual on the athlete, as you move into your first sort of session or couple of sessions, then like, what are you guys using? Chris, what do you like for your football guys? Like, what's your process?
Fundamentals. Yeah, I mean, we started with the squats, and from there you're assessing movement. So movement quality really dictates, especially these are high schoolers. So for them, the fundamentals are big. Like, you know, I even changed some things up. So for me, and partly setting them up for success, like you just said, is instead of changing the max effort every week, I'll do 2 to 3 week waves with the same movement, where we'll do like a 2 rep, or we'll do a 1 rep with a band, and the next week without a band. And I may run 3 week waves or 2 week waves like that. And the reason is because the movements are still so new to them. I want some repetition, so that what we were working on last week, like, hey, remember we were working on last week? I want you thinking that same thing. So hips are back and then straight down, or whatever it is. And that gives them some continuity, versus if you're constantly changing and it's, you know, new accommodating resistance, it can, you know, start to, you know, almost that paralysis by analysis. They're not getting a chance to really learn anything. So I found that a little repetition, you know, in that 2 to 3 week period was actually much more effective. And what it gave me the opportunity to do is I follow the same template you talked about with the max effort. We go on the 0 minute, the 2 minute, the 4, the 6, the 9, the 12, the 15. And it's when we got a 2 rep max, it's like, okay, we're going to try and add whatever, 5%, whatever it is in that lift. You're going to set that as your 7th session, as your 7th lift. And then from there, you're going to take 95% of that. You're going to take 90% of it. You're going to take 80% of it, 70, 65, 60. There's your rep scheme. And I would say in the last 3 months, I haven't had a single person miss a PR coming off those. You know, everybody's hitting those numbers. And now, right now, I'm just establishing good data, you know, and I mean, we just replicated the sumo deadlift, and, you know, some of these kids were 60, 80 pound PRs. All of them PR'd over 40 pounds here at Rubicon. And, I think it's just, you know, committing to the fundamentals and give them a little bit of that repetition, where in the past, you know, with Carlene, you know, I had a little more leeway. She's a great lifter. She trained out at Shane's, and she's been lifting for a decade, you know, so with her, I can, you know, have more of a, exercise selection, broader exercise selection than I would with these younger kids that are coming. And really honest, to be very honest, even your intermediate, or even let's say a semifinal. So I got a semifinal guy I'm working with, and, you know, super strong to get to that level, very fit, but it's still like looking at his fundamentals and the basic list. He still just needs to get better at those. He's not ready to have, you know, he doesn't even need change. We still use bands just because, you know, I love bands for a number of reasons, but so I try to keep that stuff in there. But even with your majority of your CrossFit people that are coming in, like, you know, get them on their deads and get them on their squats and get them in their presses and see where they're deficient at. And I think, Jesse, you said it earlier, something about, you know, looking at the hamstrings, you know, hamstrings protecting ACLs. And I think we pretty much come to the conclusion, right, that pretty much everybody needs more work on their glutes and hamstrings. I don't know if there's an athlete that doesn't need, you know, work on that. So when all else fails, just keep targeting that. You know, that'll probably guide you pretty well for a while.
That opportunity for that like 3 week build, like you were saying on maxes, is definitely high, especially in that if you're dealing with more of a group environment and teenagers, for sure. I definitely like that, because there's a couple things going on there that are awesome. Is one, it takes the pressure off the initial week. Yep. So if you've got someone who's new and learning, is that how heavy that 1 rep max goes, you just work until the movement's at the edge of good and before it starts to break down. And then on top of that, now you've got numbers to work with. So you're like, here's a 7 lift plan. This is what we built. We tested it. This is where it got us to. Let's move next week towards a, you know, percentage or pounds specific increase on that 1 RM. But then let's evaluate the road to get there. Like, were those 7 lifts optimal in that path? Or were you like, I loaded a little too heavy on the back end. I'm going to sort of like lean that out a little and take a little bigger jumps or a little smaller jumps initially and then a little larger jumps through the middle to get to that destination. And I mean, I think a lot of times you can do 2 weeks in a row of the same lift, have people produce a better result the second week around, only because they were smarter. Like they tested what worked in week 1, reevaluated it, built a better plan, and then ran it again and did better in week 2. And that is a great way to go for learning, because it initially, that phase, especially with with brand new athletes is you want enough repetition for the athlete to progress at the quality of the movement and their understanding of that movement, but you want enough variance so that the stimulus continues to yield a physiological response. And I think 3 weeks is pretty safe for that, even for maxes initially, right? Like you don't want to do that with a high skill athlete, because I think there's increased exposure to injury. And then 2, the tax on the nervous system will get pretty large on that system.
That's the one thing, like with what you guys are talking about, is that's one more of the things that we have to assess is what is the individual's athlete IQ that's in front of us. Just like any other thing, you have a kid in high school and one's good at math, another one's good at English, they're all different subjects they're good at. Or somebody who's just really intelligent and everything, picks up stuff quick. They really understand it. They have good energy for it. And you might have someone who's really physically just an amazing athlete who just takes a long time to psychologically, mentally pick up and learn new things. And the way you pick out your exercise selection, how frequently you do these things, is going to kind of be dependent on that as well, too. So, that's why, we're constantly asking questions, constantly assessing, because we want to make those little adjustments where needed. But definitely how fast someone's capability to learn is definitely part of that equation.
For us, once we get through that initial assessment piece, then with an individual athlete, I will actually let them choose whether they want to do upper or lower for day one. And that's more of just having them feel a little more comfortable in the space. Mm-hmm. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I'm probably like, if we go upper on day one, we're going lower on day 2.
Yeah.
So because of that, if they're like, I'd rather like start with upper, you're like, great, super easy. Or if they, some people prefer squats or lower, easy. Start there, start where they're more comfortable, show some success, and then get into that initial training session,
So I do the same thing. And then I always ask them why afterwards they made their decision. Just because, sometimes it's no big deal. They might be like, oh man, me and my friends went mountain biking yesterday, so I want to do upper body.
Yeah.
My legs are fried. And then some things might be like, oh, I hate legs. Well, it's good to know you hate legs. Because when I address that, I might want to build you up into what we're doing and let you see some PRs before I really start hammering you, And then some people are just like, let's get legs out of the way. It's the hardest one, and it's Monday. I'm fresh. Let's hammer down and go at it. It's like, okay. Like you can learn a lot about someone's personality towards training or what they're about to do with that too.
I guess that's the other piece too, is also making sure that you understand where your training is fitting into their equation. So if they're like, we go hard and heavy on Friday, Saturday, Sunday with my sport, Monday I have as a rest day. My availability to train would be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I'm willing to commit 2 hours in 2 sessions, in a training week. Because you also need to kind of know, and I don't think that doesn't really necessarily affect day 1 or day 2. But as you go home and you start to put more thought into that individual, if you're like, okay, we're going to get, 2 days is, depending on the sport, is pretty straightforward. I mean, we're going to do 1 upper, 1 lower for most all athletes. 3 days starts to be like, okay, does their sport require, or does this athlete require 2 lowers and 1 upper, or 1 upper, 1 lower? I mean, when we started with Justin, we did 3 uppers. Like we started on 3 upper body pieces because his squat and dead were appropriate for where he's at, and we really wanted to hit that upper stuff. And I mean, I think it was 12 weeks, moved his bench by 30 pounds. For someone who's actually in a good. Sorry, say again.
Was 1 a max effort? 1 was a dynamic effort, and then did you have a
accessory
day? Accessory day.
Yeah, just accessory upper. Yeah. And it worked great for like 3 or 4 months before we started making changes to that. So I think that's the other piece too, is most sport athletes, like I work with about 10, I think, like higher end individuals. And most of them, if I work one-on-one with them, I get them 2, max 3 times a week, depending on the time of year. And so then because of that, I mean, I draw everything out before the session starts, even though it's same as we would build a plan. Like I would draw everything out, and then maybe we get there and we start down that path, and I decide based off what I'm seeing or what I'm getting for feedback or what I'm feeling from the athlete, make changes to that plan. But I mean, man, 2 sessions or 3 sessions a week, from my experience, 100% you can be very successful with an athlete and have a massive impact on them. But that is if you are really cognizant of how you're using that time. Like you need to push pace hard on 2 1-hour sessions to make them count. Otherwise, you can easily get 3 movements done in an hour, and that's just not enough stimulus.
Yeah, I think so. For some of ours, high school. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, good.
So high school. So with the high school athletes, yeah, same thing. It's, right now we're, got some wrestlers that are in season, got some basketball players that are in season. So really almost everything I'm doing is strength based. In the summers, like while they're leading into football season, we up the conditioning a little bit. We'll get out on the field. We'll do I want them sprinting with sleds and no weight before they start opening up with weight, just to get the hamstrings and hip flexors ready for that top end speed. Lacrosse players, they're starting their season in the spring. Like we did a little bit of conditioning with them leading into the season. And then in the season, we get 3 days a week, and that's really it. So yeah, you manage your program right there. They don't need more conditioning. Like they're getting a ton of conditioning when they're practicing. You don't need to smoke them. Like the idea, and I'll tell them is like, hey, like the idea is you need to be better for your sport, not worse. So this is not the time to take risks, or we're making you better and just being patient. And then especially with them, same thing you're saying there. Like you only got an hour, so my teams are 1 hour and 15, which is, I think, ideal. I really like that. And with that is building them up. And the same thing I did actually with that same semifinals. Like I wasn't throwing, the accessory was built up. So the first thing I want to do is build the volume, is just get them to where they can handle the volume that you want them. And then what I tell them is like, now I want to condense that. So now I want volume density. Like let's fit that volume now in a shorter period of time, and let's get it done in that 1 hour period. Like 1 hour and 15, you should be in and out of the gym for your session. And then if they're doing a second session, but build the volume appropriately, then, really apply the density. And maybe you do it the other way. You just try to get that density in first. There's just not as many movements and you're doing other things. Jesse, is that?
It depends actually. It depends on the athlete. I mean, a lot of good, like most all the sport athletes I deal with have very high GPP. And so because of that, we can do basically on a upper or lower day, I would look to get 7 different movement patterns in, whether it's like, max effort, drop sets, into another like primary or secondary piece, and then into sort of 3 or 4 accessory pieces, and then finishing out a midline. I mean, no one escapes the, skeleton hand to midline. But yeah, it really depends on the athlete's GPP. I mean, the higher it is, the more I'll push for that volume in those initial phases, because otherwise it won't really be enough stimulus. I mean, they'll generally, I find, will produce better like velocity rates on bars with bands than our powerlifters will in the initial phases. And then like most of our athletes tested on the early stages with us, in the first month will be like 0.9 to 1 meter a second velocity on a squat or a speed pull, like kind of straight away, versus lifters can take a lot more time to get to that level. And then with that sort of like that piece, like, I mean, we're pushing it. Like I've got 2 enduro mountain bike athletes who are like world class that I started working with about 8 weeks ago. And I realized that in the sessions where we hit 5 movements, it just wasn't enough stimulus for them. And 7 seems to be like a good dose. And they're just sort of like, they're at the tail end of their off season now. And we're trying to get them the max out of this last bunch of weeks before, we lean out into the start of the season.
So when I said, I ask an athlete what they want to start, just like Jesse, like you want to do upper or lower body day. After they said it, like I said, I'll ask them why. And I laid out some of the reasons why, but another reason why is because depending on what they tell me, I'm going to ask some other questions. And depending on their sport, I might choose to change the days just because of when I peak them for their event, what body parts they need to get the most amount of rest before they actually compete. And so that can also dictate whether they start with an upper or a lower body day as well. So that is also part of the equation because, if it's an athlete coming in, well, eventually they're going to compete, right? We might get them in off season. We might get them like preseason, or maybe for some reason, I'm the person who can help them and it's mid season and I'm trying to help them save their season, whatever it is. we make adjustments accordingly to all those different things, in the off season, we give them a psychological break in a way while still progressing them forward. What does that athlete need? And that's what, we do, but that can dictate what days they start on as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Are you guys the same for number of days a week? Like, is that what you guys end up, Shane? Like, is that what you get for sport athletes? Like kind of 2 or 3 days?
Depends on usually mostly 4.
Yeah.
But depends. I'm really anywhere from 1 to 5 days a week with an athlete.
Yeah.
I would say that the most common is usually 2 or 4. Okay. Yeah. So a sport where we need to do max effort, dynamic work, and all the accessories, like a lot of those athletes will be 4 times with me a week. Athletes that are using this type of training that maybe has a lot more technique involved, might only be 2 days a week, and then I can lay out other accessory days or things that they can do on their own. So it just kind of depends on the athlete. So you look at you get someone who maybe get a professional snowboarder does half pipe, right? Well, they need a lot of technique work, gymnastics, a lot of mobility work. Technique work is going to be the most important for them, right? So I can't take up a ton of time with them, nor do I need to, and so 2 days a week with someone like that, I can get someone world class and go to Olympics for that, So it just depends on what the sport is. But now you're talking about a sport, like if they want to be the best Olympic lifter, a power lifter, or a CrossFitter in the world. Well, now we're talking about something different, right? So it just kind of depends. And it usually tends to be the higher the skill set in the movement, the less I actually need to have them, because they have a skill set coaches they need to go work with. For that.
Yeah. So that's the thing too, right? Like some of these athletes are doing 2-3 big sessions a day, and it's their full-time job,
Now, if they have a bad technique coach in the area who doesn't really know what they're doing and they're really messing the athlete up, then I'm going to want to see them 4 days a week, because I got to fortify them against that coach.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a perfect world. We don't always get technique coaches, other coaches that we work with that we feel is optimal for our athlete. And maybe just because they live in an area and they don't have anybody else available to them, maybe in their specific sport, that's the only person in the area that can help them. But sometimes that also means that we have to pick up the mess, maybe, as you could say. So if this individual exceeds certain movement patterns, or they don't do enough in certain areas, I have to make adjustments for that to try to keep the athlete as healthy as possible, hopefully keep them injury resilient, get their performance up so that they can, maybe it's a local high school kid in a sport that maybe they can go to Division I college and get a higher level skill set coach, or they can get sponsored or get recognized at events to where they can pick up a higher level technique coach. And then maybe that changes. Maybe they pick up a phenomenal technique coach who handles them properly, and I don't need to see them as often.
Yeah. I mean, that might sound like, that might come off as being like, I don't know, jerky or something to people, but I mean, it is true. Like the other side of that is some athletes who sit on like provincial or like state teams for you guys, or national teams, as compete as individuals, but are on a provincial or national team. A lot of times the money that that team might have, depending on the sport, but time it gets to their strength and conditioning, that coach is writing a general program that's going to a team of 10 to 20 athletes that they're expected just to do on their own time. And they'll just give them a 8 to 12 week off-season program that's not specific to that individual at all. And then the other factor is age of the athlete. Sometimes I feel like those strength conditioning coaches who might be programming for youth athletes on that sort of national team level can prioritize nothing going wrong and no risk over results. So when they get, they hand off this program to 20 athletes, it's generic for them to go do that. If everyone comes back and didn't get injured, then check mark. Versus like, what were the results? Did we see a positive change? How much were you able to push that? Because some of the people I get to work with are the strongest people on those teams. 100% of the men and women, the male and female people on teams. And it's because they're getting individual time. And that individual time for a high performance athlete is a massive deal. And having eyes on, and a system like the conjugate system is largely based off of what we started with initially talking about, which is assessment, which is not handing someone 8 to 12 weeks and saying, good luck out there, enjoy your summer, catch a late August. It's being able to be in the gym week in, week out and be like, oh, this athlete's conditioning is dropped or changed. Their vertical jump is down. Their box squat or max efforts are up, and being able to then make a change for the next session or the next week, or make notes where like, hey, we need to move a little more this direction. Because although for any, in season, out of season, or between A and B events or whatever, if you've got a block of time that you're working through, you might start down what seems like the best path to get to your destination. And then along that path be like, actually their uptick on that was really fast. They got really good at the pieces we wanted to focus on over the 6 weeks. And now we've actually got some wiggle to add in some other pieces. Or, it doesn't seem like this is paying off. We use a test retest piece, and we need to reevaluate what we're implementing to make sure we do end up where we're trying to get to, or we're not going there. And that to me is only done through eyes on. Justin, Ellie are the only remote athletes that I work with, and I only work with them because I get to see them for every single training session on FaceTime. So I'm still, although I'm not there in person, I watch every session because I need to see what's going on. Like, is it being executed on correctly? Are they making the best weight selection and weight choices? Do they need something to change suddenly? And if so, what? And then being able to take that information to the rest of the team and be like, hey, here's what I'm seeing today. Are you seeing this? Yeah, I'm also seeing this. Or no, I didn't notice that. I'll touch base with them tomorrow and make sure that is on point, or go look back at the data, and I think that's what produces the highest level result for those highest level athletes.
And, I want you guys to, like what I said, like Jesse said, like people can probably like take what I said, like, oh, that seems kind of like, jerky thing to say. I don't bash someone else's coach. They have a technique coach. I don't bash them.
100%.
What I do is I try to create a dialogue and a friendship with that coach. And so if I see things that I think are holding their athletes back, if I see that they're repeating things too much, or certain things that are creating problems, I'll talk to them about it. If they don't handle that well, that's not my fault. They're not a high level coach, and then they're not going to move higher. The coach I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like every year that goes by, I'm a better coach than what I was before. All of us talking right now, that's the case. So if you met me my first year coaching, you might be like, he's a low level coach. Yeah, it was my first year. I was a low level coach, and that's the thing. That's okay. I would have loved to have a coach who would have said, hey, I'm working with this athlete too. And, oh, you're working with off season, I'm working on season. Here's the things I've noticed. And, they were just generally wanting to help. My job is quality of life for the athlete, period. My job is to improve their quality of life. So if someone wants to win a gold medal in the Olympics, that's their quality of life. Someone wants to be healthy and overcome maybe some health issues or some disabilities they were born with, or show their kids how to have a healthier, higher quality of life. That's what it is. But so all I do is, how do I optimize the quality of life for this athlete from what they need from me? How do I optimize their performance, optimize longevity in sport, and set them up to have a successful post-athlete life? Like, that is what I need to do. If they have a coach on a technique coach that's not up to par, let's see if we can bring them up to par. Maybe that coach, sometimes the coaches even know it. Sometimes they have an ego problem. Well, that's the coach's problem. I don't care if their feelings get hurt. I need my athlete safe. I need them successful. If they're a lower level coach, all right, who can I get them around to help them out? How can we help them level up? And if they're eager and willing to learn, awesome. Like, cool, let's level them up and get them where they need to be, But my client is the athlete, not the technique coach. So I need to keep my client successful and healthy. And I'm not going to bash another coach. I'm always going to deliver, information with them and try to work a good relationship with them and go from there. But don't ever forget what your job is. And your job is to, in the amount of time you have, improve that person's life as much as you can.
Yeah, developing rapport and having a team, I think, is paramount. Like, And even if you don't agree with them, find ways to
Mm-hmm.
lead them to understanding, on their own, why maybe those aren't the best decisions. The high school football player, perfect example, being a strength and conditioning
Mm-hmm.
coach in a high school sounds like, in some ways a great job, but in the end, a terrible job. Like, somebody asked me about that's something I would want to jump into. And I'm like, I would lose all control of being able to really help somebody because you're trying to facilitate 50 to 70 people. It's not even the strength and conditioning coach's fault necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how do you program for that? And it's like, yeah, you send them home with a 12-week program, but what's the implementation? Like, it might not have anything to do with the program in itself, even though, I think right now a 12-week program, really isn't going to be that beneficial for an individual generally. Because when you have a trainer like yourself, you're constantly evaluating and assessing. Like we started with, like you're looking at, like, oh, like this is actually like not up to speed where it needs to be. We're going to start hitting these lifts a little bit different. So I think that by doing the best you can to build rapport with the team is going to keep your client psychologically or your athlete. Because if they're going in and they're not trusting their coach, now you've got an issue now with them and their coach, and that's probably not leading to increased performance either. So that's an important part, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Like, it is worth noting, some of those coaches are really under the gun. I've talked with coaches who work with teams, and they might have 75, 85 athletes that they're managing the strength conditioning program for. Like, that feels hopeless at the highest level.
Execution is not going to be there by athletes. You can't watch every movement of every athlete that they do,
and everyone needs guidance. Like,
100%.
I mean, because they're the top of the food chain in their sport. I mean, top of the food chain in their sport, from what I've seen, has been every level of knowledge and skill. And when it comes to the strength conditioning side, you get people who come in and you're like, oh man, this person actually moves quite well and is pretty good. And other people who are like, how are they such a great athlete being this under, like, just this far behind on base movement patterns?
I want you to think about this. And this is something I actually really like about powerlifting. In powerlifting, we have 3 movements: a squat, you sit down, stand up, a bench press, you basically lay down, push something away from you, and a deadlift where you simply just pick something up off the ground, right? These are little simpler, much simpler movements in gymnastics, much simpler than weightlifting, like snatch and clean and jerk is a higher skill set movement, and there's more to it. But I have had, like I said, I've had 127 world records broken out of my gym. I've had athletes that have reduplicated world records at like unprecedented levels, right? And I've never had a world record holder, athletes that are as automatic as anybody you'll see technique-wise, that I didn't constantly make suggestions and adjustments to weekly.
Yeah.
See something to make a slight adjustment weekly. Now, the difference is the adjustments are smaller. And maybe if they're squatting 800 pounds and want to need to hit 805 to break a world record, maybe they don't need that adjustment that I gave them to hit 805. But if they want to hit 820, 30, 50, something like that, they're eventually going to need that adjustment. But that getting a quarter inch out of position leads to a half inch out of position, leads to an inch out of position, leads to maybe a mobility loss in the joint, leads to, maybe a loss in muscle mass in one of the limbs because of the articulation of the joint, and now they're having uneven balance. I don't let it get to that. And what I'm telling you is, like, Louis Simmons is really, obviously world famous, world renowned as a strength coach, but listen to some of his words. Like, people would ask him about training, and he'd tell you, like, I've been judged by world record holders in squats, like, since 1980, since the early 80s, right? And so we know that Louis Simmons is extremely knowledgeable, was an extremely knowledgeable individual, and world-renowned, world-class coach, and he still had eyes on him every single movement he did. That's why you always hear him talk about training partners are important. Well, I want you to understand, at Westside Barbell, training partners weren't like the average gym. It wasn't like you like, hey, let's go get my best buddy and like he can go train with me. That's not the case. What the case is you level everybody up, you educate everybody to teach anybody to get to a world record in technique. And then everybody there is capable of, anybody who's high level, been at Westside long enough, should be capable of teaching anybody how to achieve a world record technique wise. So then if you have 3 or 4 training partners in your group, all 3 or 4 of them are capable of teaching people to world records. So even though they're training partners, they're really coaches, at least in technique and those movements, maybe not programming, because maybe, Louis or someone else in the group always did the programming for them. But they should be at that kind of level in technique. So, why would you think one of the most knowledgeable coaches that ever exist, the most successful coaches to ever exist, needed someone to watch him every day he was training. Why do you think he suggests that you get the right training partners that will become students of their sport and learn to educate themselves and level up? Because the more frequently you can have eyes on you, and he says training partners because not everybody can have hire a trainer or a coach to watch them every single lift they do their whole career, right? And so that's why he suggests that. But it's because it's that important. Because, you look at this football coach at a high school football strength coach, not only does he have 70, 80 people that don't know what they're really doing, he can't watch every single movement. If he watched 70 people squat and took him 30 seconds to watch each squat, that's 35 minutes. So what, he gets an hour with somebody, he gets to watch 2 squats from every person? It's not possible for them, right? And then, it's not always their fault too, because sometimes the head coaches tell them what they want them to do.
Totally. And that's the thing. Like, their job might depend on staying, like, keeping the coloring inside of the lines. I mean, the great thing about that for us is that opens the door to just push some of these athletes way past where they really ought to have got to. And it's such a special opportunity. And man, I've had a really great time with the athletes that I get to work with. I'm super thankful across the board for whatever sports, hockey, MMA, BMX, moguls, enduro, CrossFit, like all those are things. I love it. I love the challenge of it. I love being able to pick it apart. And I mean, some of those sports I don't necessarily have a super great handle on. Like, I couldn't tell you a whole lot about football. I just, it's not really part of how I grew up and so on and so forth. But, I mean, we've been pretty successful when we've had that opportunity just by following what we've talked about. Collect information, understand your athlete, understand the injuries of sport. Like, you don't have to know every team, all of the stats and, what everyone's up to know how to field the greatest athlete that you can build out of the person that you're working with.
The thing is for us is, we become movement quality experts. We become experts in special strengths, type of strengths individuals need. And, I'll give you guys a good example. I remember watching Jeremy McGrath, who's one of the best motocross riders of all time, right? And I mean, I've been on a dirt bike twice. I rode, road racing bikes, my whole life, but only on a dirt bike 2 or 3 times. And not good at it by any means, because who is, riding it only a couple of times. So I would say I know nothing about the sport. I know a little bit, but not really much. So, but what I can tell you is I watched Jeremy McGrath, was number 1 in the world for a long time. And then eventually Pastrana and Carmichael came up. And I remember watching all 3 of them race in Daytona Beach one time. And, McGrath was way off the front. Even though he wasn't winning titles anymore, he was way off the front for the first half of the race. And then you watch Carmichael reel him in and Pastrana reel him in, and they went past him. And what happens with motocross riders when they get older, they start to get really heavy pumps in their forearms and their grip. And so McGrath still showed how dominant and how awesome his technique was, that he was way off the front for the first half. But once he got a pump, it was gone. He couldn't keep the pace anymore. And so I watched him talk about, I'm getting older, and older motocross riders get really big pumps. I've been working with this, this bodybuilding strength this coach who's a bodybuilder, personal trainer, to help me stay in the game longer. The problem is that bodybuilders are really good at learning how to get a pump and optimizing a pump, and what this athlete actually needs is the exact opposite. So what I would tell you is what I've learned when I had Conjugate Black, my team got second at the games. And when we went to the games, we were getting the strength of my athletes were coming up extremely quick. Like, their deadlifts came up really quick, which was evident in that games because they won the deadlift workout. But what ended up happening is they went from getting really strong to not getting low back pumps to when they got really strong at deadlifts and squats, they started getting severe back pumps, which obviously is not conducive for someone in CrossFit, right? You don't want to compete in the games, get massive pumps where you can barely move your limbs, or your low back gets a massive pump. So what I had the team do is they started doing, at the end of every session, they had to do 6 sets of 30 reverse hypers. What we ended up doing, these athletes would start with, maybe 2 45-pound plates or 4 45-pound plates. all the guys got to the point where they're using 5 to 6 45-pound plates on each side. So 10 to 12 45-pound plates, doing 6 sets of 30 with short rest periods. It was about, before all the athletes, it took about 6 to 9 weeks for all of them to say at some point, their backs blew up at the beginning of doing this. And at some point they got to the point where they're like, couldn't get a pump in my low back if I wanted to.
Then you've kind of used that tool too, where you're like, okay, we use that tool. Now we move on. Now
different.
What do we do?
Yeah.
Correct. And now
that's where
that's the whole thing, like someone like Jeremy McGrath. Now I would take that and say, okay, what we need to do is very high repetition, very low rest period, and just hammer them to the point where those forearms can't get a pump if they wanted to. It's actually the exact opposite of what 99% of personal trainers or strength coaches would do. They would work on trying to get someone stronger, which means with lower rep schemes, which means they would actually get more of a pump, like a bodybuilder would, and it actually make them more efficient at getting a pump. And so then the athlete's sitting there going, God, man, I'm doing all this work and I'm just getting pumps faster and faster and faster. I'm coming towards the end of my career. It's just coming on quick. I can't believe how quick it's coming. No, you're just doing the wrong things. And this is why it takes
age can always be that thing.
So. Yeah. They default to, well, this took out every top, world champion motocross rider that I've ever met. It's just my turn, instead of, maybe someone taking a different approach with them and doing something that's not necessarily conventional. But this is why, as coaches, we have a different level of experience. And because of that, we can ask questions and we can make more adjustments. Conor McGregor, after he fought Mayweather, made a comment I thought was a phenomenal comment. They interviewed him afterwards and said, man, you did really good for an MMA fighter to step in against one of the greatest boxers of all time. You did really good, and, kind of give us your side of the fight. And he said, a champion, he's like, I came out, I was doing good, and he made an adjustment, and I made an adjustment, and he made an adjustment. I started doing good again, and he made an adjustment. And I can't remember. He said somewhere between, he made 6 to 9 adjustments, right? He said, then eventually I ran out of adjustments. He goes, you know what a champion is? He goes, a champion's the one who has the most adjustments to make. He goes, he had more than I did, and that's why I lost. He goes, I haven't been boxing long enough to learn enough adjustments to deal with someone like him. And that is the truth. And as a strength coach, a personal trainer, whatever you want to call it, whatever you actually do, the younger we are, the newer we are to this, the less experience we have, the less adjustments we have to make. As we've been in this long enough, I'm not knocking whoever was helping McGrath. I believe he said he had a personal trainer. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was doing it on his own. I don't know. It's been a long time. It doesn't matter. That coach, maybe, if he had a coach, maybe afterwards, 5, 10 years later, that coach is like, oh man, I wish I could do this all over again because I've learned these other things that could have really helped them out. But I want you to think about this. It still plagues that sport today. No one's figured it out yet. Right? So simply, none of the athletes have worked with the right coach yet. How many world champion motocross riders are there? There's only a handfuls of them, right? So how many people are, they're reaching out to coaches. So you get, over a 10-year period, if there's 3 different guys who won titles and they're going looking for a coach to keep them in a title run, you have 3 different personal trainers, 3 different strength coaches to go to. You got 3 people in the nation that they tried. You're not really knocking down big numbers of doors of strength coaches to make a change in that sport long enough. Someone kind of has to get lucky and get the right person that can help at the right time.
Do you have something, Chris?
I was just going to say, I think an important part, and this is a little bit back, it still goes into that, is that understanding as the trainer of your athletes, I feel like there's this tendency, and maybe it was just the academics that, I went through, like with the master's program, of trying to replicate the sport inside the gym. And it's that's really going to be a bad thing. The last thing you want to do is continue to create pattern overload. Like, that's not the idea. What your goal is to how can you get this athlete to produce power, speeds that are relevant to their sport, and use other movements to do that. So it's like, okay, your back's getting blown up with deadlifts and burpees or deadlifts and handstand pushups. Like, let's not keep doing deadlifts and handstand pushups for volume. Let's do a reverse hyper. So now we've changed that stress and that stimulus, but we're still hitting it in a different way. So it's not like we're using some fancy thing. I'm not sitting on a single leg doing a single arm cable cross, pull across the body or something. Like, I want these athletes to be able to produce power. I want to push their force velocity curve up on the left side of the curve and on the middle side of the curve and on the right side of the curve. So, I think some trainers just need to take solace in that, because I see all this fancy stuff out there, and it really, it's more for aesthetics than it is for functionality. Because if you get your athletes to produce force, which you can do inside the gym at a very high level, and Louis shown that stuff. I think you talk with the bodybuilders, that was the common. Like, we studied bodybuilders because they were the only people we had to study, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what are all those guys doing? Like, okay, cool. So we're going to put on a ton of mass, and then you get guys like, Mel Stiffs addressed it right in the beginning of super training. Like, okay, this isn't for training for athletes, bodybuilding. Barry Ross talks a lot about it in his book with training, Felix, is that, you need mass specific force, not just mass. So, trying to shift your mindset away from, it's not just hypertrophy. Like, maybe it is, maybe you do need some of that hypertrophy, but it's more about athletic development and and just being comfortable in those basics. We talked about at the beginning.
The 2 books Chris just mentioned, get them if you're a coach.
Yeah,
I would suggest that.
Yeah, man, that's very true. With time and having had the chance to work with more great athletes, I think the more you do that, the more you start with the basics, and then most of the time, most of the athletes would be like, oh man, this person's totally in my skill set to develop athletically. And the idea of like, oh, I need to learn about this sport and then mimic this sport in the gym, I don't see how that wins. It just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. Like, I remember watching strikers using the cable machine and just going through the motion of like a straight punch with a cable machine. It's like, you are neither building speed nor strength that will have any application to a strike.
Yeah, you're not going to teach a Major League Baseball player to throw a 100-mile-an-hour pitch by throwing a shot put.
Yeah.
Like,
this plan does not work at all.
What you can do is you can mess up their timing and actually train different muscle groups. Yeah. Because, they did a study, it was for baseball, and I think they said no more than 1 or 2 ounces plus or minus the weight of a baseball actually transfers to gaining speed or distance on a ball. Because once you start to change the weight too much, you start to change the way the shoulder joint takes on that stress, and you start to change the angles and the tissue that you are activating and using to throw that ball. And so therefore it doesn't transfer over. People get too hung up on trying to mimic a sport. Look, if coaching was so easy that I could just say, hey, you play soccer, let's double the weight of the soccer ball and keep playing soccer. Boom, done. We wouldn't have jobs. It'd be pretty simple. But what it really is, optimizing your body for your sport and deciphering, do I need more absolute power? Do I need to increase my force rate production? Do I need to produce force for longer periods of time? Where am I falling apart? Where am I excelling at? That's what it is. It's a technique coach's job to optimize technique. And really, you really want to work out something that, the technique coach should know or learn how to do for a lot of sports, sport-specific conditioning. Okay. So like wrestling as an example, there's a lot of things we can do to help with conditioning for wrestlers, but at the same time, there's a certain amount of wrestling they need to do and drills they need to do to have a sports-specific conditioning available to them as well. And that doesn't mean that they're, trying to grapple a barbell in my gym and we keep adding weight to it. It has to be actual grappling drills or grappling live with other athletes. Sometimes smaller athletes are faster or better endurance. Bigger athletes are stronger, and you have to be smart with them. So, and those things all provide stimulus for an athlete that's phenomenal for them to learn as well,
Yeah, building a better athlete has yielded much higher results initially working with athletes than trying to create their sport with implements from inside of a gym.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 100%.
Movements you do and do not use in general.
Okay, you want me to talk about that?
Yeah.
There's some things in general that I usually really don't use. I don't do pause squats. I don't do pause deadlifts. I will say, when someone like, well, no, but you program for me a 2-position or 3-position pull in Olympic lifting. Well, there's a difference. I'm actually trying to help your technique. And if I feel that you need to do a 2-position or 3-position pull, there's probably a reason technique-wise around it. Now, why I do not do pause squats? There's a good reason why for me. When I tell you I don't use something, a lot of times that's 99% of the time, maybe. There's always a person and there's always a reason. I would just say this would be not common. I would do it. Here's the thing. I utilize more box squats than free squats. A pause squat, in my mind, is the exact opposite of a box squat. It goes the other way. It increases chance of injury while you're doing it. What you have to do is actually apply the brakes, come to a complete stop. And then I want you to think about this. Time under tension is the enemy for most athletes. Time under tension is a friend for a bodybuilder, right? So if I want someone to Olympic lift, if I want someone to power lift or squat, anything like that, I want them to accelerate as fast as possible. So if you take a boxer and a boxer's relaxed, they go from a relaxed to the dynamic state. They throw a punch from a relaxed state. They throw a punch at a faster rate of speed. If they flex as hard as they can and then go to throw a punch, it's going to be substantially slower, not as effective. So why would I want to do that to my athlete on purpose? And some people say, well, yeah, but if you do a front squat or back squat and you do pauses in the bottom, this will make your back stronger so you can maintain a better chest position. Yeah, my good mornings do that. My side to sides on a GH do that. My arched around back good mornings do that. My seated good mornings do that. My seated deadlift does that. I can do isometric. I do isometric good morning holds, max band tension for 20 seconds, 40 seconds, minute, whatever I want to do to maintain chest positions. I've never had a problem with my athletes dropping chest with me if they're, say, a power lifter. If they've been with me long enough, they're not going to. It's just
that's a great point. I've never thought about that. And you're training yourself to be slow. I mean, I'll use it for positional, right? So, like, if it's somebody that needs to work in the position before they start dropping into a clean, sub-maximal loads, like you're not really lifting heavy weights. You're just trying to get comfortable in the bottom position because that's where people generally stuck at. So you address it that way. But, yeah, it's the exact opposite. A box squat, you can accelerate out of it because you've had that, relaxation and now you can go. Whereas if you're under that isometric hold, it's going to be slow. And you adapt to the stimulus that you provide the body with. So if you train slow, you move slow. That's a great point.
You need acceleration for your Olympic lifting. But like I said, I do. You guys can look at my programming today. Over the last 6 weeks, I guarantee you I've programmed 2 position or 3 position pulls for somebody for Olympic lifting. But that was a technique thing. And it's not done so frequently that it creates these issues. To me, a lot of times people can dynamically maintain a perfect position. It doesn't mean they can statically maintain that position for a long period of time. So what if I break someone down, their knees cave in, and then they go to accelerate up? Now I'm creating movement pattern faults. I look at what the stimulus is needed for them, and that is what I go by and what can keep them to last the longest. So it's not something I do extremely frequently. Now, to Jesse's question to me about like things that I don't do frequently or just don't do or stuff like that. Here's the thing. There's a lot of exercises that I might not do with an individual when I start. And say if I was training Chris and me and Chris are friends, I start training him. He had an injury. He's like, oh, I got injured on X lift. I just don't do anything like that because I got injured on it. You know what my goal for Chris is? To get him where he wants to be. And I want to get that movement back. And I want to fortify him so good about it that he, in his own mind, is like, there's no way I could ever get hurt doing this movement again. As we get older as athletes, if we just stop doing every movement we get potential irritation or injury on, or we're scared because we're worried we're going to get injured, that's the problem. Louis Simmons said something to me a long time ago. I had this grand idea when I was like in junior high and high school that you had to be like a doctor, have a PhD in biomechanics and physics to invent a new exercise. Okay. And because that's what I thought it took. I'm like, how do you know if this is safe or not? Right. Because you hear all these doctors say like, that's not a safe movement. This is a safe movement. You hear this trainer say, this isn't a safe movement. That's not a safe movement. And so I asked Lou, I'm like, you invent exercises weekly. How do you do this and know that athletes are going to stay safe? Because it's pretty simple. If an athlete can attain the position, they should be able to optimally accelerate out of that position. He goes, whatever joint angle you can attain, you should be able to accelerate out of that without injury. He's like, if you can't, you haven't been doing, the right special exercises, you haven't been training properly. If you're trained properly and you're balanced properly and you should be able to optimally accelerate out of any position you can get in. And I'm like, God, that makes so much sense. Our body shouldn't be able to get in that position if we shouldn't be there, right? And if we can get in there, we should be able to optimally accelerate without getting injured. The problem is that, everybody walks around with joint deficiencies, dysfunctions, I should say. And between those joint dysfunctions and not being well balanced for what they're trying to do with their body, they can get injuries or irritations or wear and tear. And then maybe they take impact from their sport that adds to that. Maybe Chris trained extremely intelligent, but maybe he's in a contact sport that he took an impact injury. And so now he's like, oh God, I can't do good mornings anymore. After I took this hit, like I've never been able to do that. It's like, so me, I'm thinking, okay, well, he's still doing that sport. So if I want to fortify him against injury, I got to get that movement back. And I got to get that movement back at a higher capacity than it was before to prove to him that he's more resilient to injury than he's ever been. Because what happens if Chris can't do that exercise anymore and he becomes half as strong as that movement and takes a similar type of impact? I guarantee you it's going to be worse on him now. Okay? So my whole career with an athlete, I'm always trying to regain stuff that they lost. So if I have someone who's an older athlete who's lost a lot of movements, I want to gain back as many of those movements as possible. Okay? And when I say that, I mean properly, in a way where they're not injured doing it. They can do it safely. They feel mentally safe and mentally, ready for what I'm bringing towards them. You just can't keep losing movements. The more movements you lose, the higher injury rate goes up and the less performance you have.
I've definitely agree with that. And I've experienced that as an athlete with injuries from field sports and logger sports, those sort of pieces where there's stuff I've given up. And now I look back and I need that back, and that some of the stuff in my own personal training over the next year or couple of years is getting back to some of those things that I let go way too fucking early. It's really interesting to hear what people have to say. Oh, I don't like that, or I'm afraid of deadlifts. I mean, how can that not immediately make you gravitate towards that has to be fixed?
Mm-hmm.
I always liked when Louis would list off a bunch of his injuries and finish with still not afraid of the barbell. And you're like, yeah, man, it's really, that was I only met him in his at 64 or something like that. I was that was when I met him, right?
Especially functional movement.
Pretty, yeah, totally. Yeah.
If it's something you don't want to pick something up, it's well, you are screwed. You might get away with that for a little bit, but that's going to be a big problem. And the longer you avoid it, the major the blow up's going to happen. You can't pick something up off the ground. I don't care if you're an athlete or you're not. That is something that every human has the ability to do. Oh, obviously there can be physical limitations that are truly medical, but in general, everybody should be able to pick something up. Everybody should be able to stand up and down out with squats. If you don't want to do those things and you're showing a functional limitation that at some point will create some sort of joint issue because you've got restriction across the joint. If the joint's not transferring force across the joints the way it's supposed to, it's absorbing it. And now you're going to start to have, some sort of destruction. Look at frozen shoulders. People stop using their arms, it's well, yeah, of course, you're sitting in front of a computer and a desk, and not that that's their fault. That's just what the demands of life are. But that's all the more reason you need to get your hands overhead. You need to be working on pull-ups and ring rows and push-ups and all those movements. And if those movements aren't good for you, then you need to find a progression to get to a point where you can perform those.
That's the frozen shoulder is actually a pretty good one for us. That was one of the first general athletes we had come in. Was Mary was I think she would have been early 50s when she came in. Both shoulders, dealing with frozen shoulders, secretary her whole life, right up until currently. Could not raise her hands over her head, and that was in gym one. And between working with Heather as a practitioner, so working on healthcare stuff, giving her extra mobility pieces, and then building her strength up. I think it was 5 years ago, so maybe 8 years into her training with us, she competed for weightlifting, and for her age class, came up 1 kilo under the Canadian American record.
Damn.
For someone who couldn't put hands over their head to now being judged by 3 judges at the national level for being able to lock out shoulder elbow position under speed and load at about 60 years old. That stuff's so awesome.
Yeah. And this is where part of what makes CrossFit successful is because you take a generalist, and so since the individual's a generalist, everything comes their way. And so even if you have a coach that's newer to CrossFit, as long as they can teach the basic techniques at a good level and they follow programming, or maybe they just follow .com or whatever, you're going to see so much variety that it starts to eliminate glaring weaknesses. And you see a lot of people who are like, man, my shoulder's starting to feel better, and I'm doing more movements and more variations I've ever done in my life. My hips starting to feel better. This is starting to feel better. So, CrossFit's been great for that. And I think people need to pay attention to, if you sign up for CrossFit, you never did it before, and you had a bunch of aches, irritations, and they went away without doing PT, you have to understand that that was part of the fix. And then you have to look into why was that the fix. And I want you guys to think about Louis hit his best deadlift at 35 years old, if I'm remembering the age correctly. And he was matching that deadlift at 70 years old. But from the time he was 35 to 70, he had broke his back in 9 places. In 1980, they wanted to replace both his knees. He didn't get his knees replaced till his early 70s.
I felt that knee once. It was like a bunch of plastic glass in a garbage bag.
It felt like it snap, crackle, popped, and it hinged and ratcheted all the way up. And
I've never felt anything like that in my life.
And he felt it in his mid-50s and didn't get it done until, I'm sorry, early 60s or whatever it was. And he didn't get it done until his early 70s, right? But his knees felt like that ever since I knew him. And I mean, that's, been 20 years, over 20 years, and he still was performing at that level, and he was still picking back new exercises and still, getting an injury, have a problem. And this, want to know how part of why he was a great strength coach? Because he never quit. Since he was never going to quit, he had to find a fix. Since he had no choice but to find a fix, because he didn't leave himself any other choice, he did. And he found fix after fix after fix. And that's when the individuals at Westside, the early guys at Westside, man, they put themselves through hell, and we all have to thank them for that, because they took a beating for a reason. They knew they were going to take a beating. They experimented. They achieved very high level result, but their bodies got beat up bad. Yeah. But they paved the way for the individuals at Westside, more towards the middle, near the end of Westside. They got to benefit from all the performance gains and didn't have to deal with all the injury that they had to deal with. So we have to thank them for that. But it was because of that we got to evolve. And if someone wasn't trying to figure out how to get that exercise back or how to get back to that movement, it would have never happened. So, everything that you guys are learning about the conjugate system exists because we try to regain exercises and movements that weren't available to us because of injuries, irritations, or whatever reason. We had to regain them. Okay,
even so this from exercise selection.
What's that?
Just not from exercise selection. He found the conjugate because he started periodized training. It's like, okay, this is not working. I've broken my back twice, so now let's look at a completely different programming model, and I'm going to hire Charninga to go and translate all these Russian texts, and that's that kind of. He was from strength and conditioning coach. I don't know that you can find somebody that not only walked the walk, but just did it in such a high level academically and physically.
Yeah,
I think both for a coach and also for an athlete, a willingness to change and an unwillingness to quit should always lead you to success. Like just a willingness to learn, to try new things, to hear what other people have to say, even if you disagree, and then apply, test, and learn from those things, and then make some of them your own. Other stuff, just give credit where credit is due. And then an unwillingness to quit. I mean, I've had a couple of surgeries. I've definitely had a bunch of injuries through different sports and activities and jobs. And I mean, I've always felt like that, where it's just like, I won't give in. And so far, the numbers keep moving forward. Chris, anything like things for you with like the athletes you work with that you just don't do, or things you like, we always do?
I don't know. I was trying to think of anything I don't do. And I mean, maybe I don't know because I can't think of them because I don't do them. But as far as like things that I do, like when we talked a little bit about, if it's lower, I'm hammering glutes and hamstrings, like banded inverse curls, GHRs, reverse hypers, good mornings. Those like really just take precedent, and not just even my CrossFitter. I mean, CrossFitters for sure, because we, a lot of leg dominant athletes and weak hips and hamstrings, but even, I was watching videos of Tyreek Hill, who's one of the most freakish athletes in the NFL. I mean, he can do 10 leg curls, with just his body weight, no problem. He's been doing them forever.
Nordic curl?
Yeah, Nordic curl, exactly. And it's just like you're watching him, and you start. Ben Patrick, obviously from Knees Over Toes, has started to really make that more and more popular. But obviously that's stuff that Westside's been doing forever. Is there is something about that. You hear the whole story about knee flexion under high loads is just, not what the sport replicates. And it's like, well, like, yeah, you can use that argument, but from an anecdotal standpoint, do them and tell me what you feel. Like your hamstrings are going to feel stronger, I promise. So yeah, really hit those a lot. Other than that, I can't think of anything I don't do.
Something, Chris, sorry, you talking kind of reminded me, just because I only talked about one thing I don't do. I never said anything I do all the time. I brought up the pause squats because it's controversial, and I know it is, but I want to give people something to think about.
Yeah.
But finishers, we do not finish a workout, a day training, without finishers. And just for you guys to remember, our finishers are something that's like maybe 50, 100, 200 reps. It might be for time, a minute, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, whatever it ends up being. It is something designed to, in my mind, hit the weakest muscle group that you use that day, or the weakest let's say you're trying to raise your deadlift and you do a full workout. What's the weakest muscle group you have for the deadlift? Was it your spinal erectors, or your hips, or was it your hamstrings? Whatever it was, that's what I like to do a finisher on. And eventually, you get well-rounded, and we do finishers on every body part at some point because we're going through them. But I do finishers because that helps me recover faster. I recover faster. I can train at a higher volume. I can make changes faster. But it also makes it so I'm not sore. I'm not beat up. It's not a badge of honor to walk in when you're dragging a leg and you look like you should be put down and you're going to get a workout in. Like, dude, I appreciate your mind's there. But if you're moving like that, how do you expect to be a world-class athlete who's winning at the highest level? You can't move poorly and horribly and win at the highest level, So I do finishers. Finishers help us recover faster. They give extra volume into that area. They carry nutrients and hydration into that area, and they keep us healthy. I was talking to a competitive bodybuilder yesterday, and my advice to him was finish every workout with a finisher. I know you guys are already good at blood flow because it's bodybuilding, but I would still take something that's 100, 200 reps, something outside the realm of what you normally do, and try to get even harder, try to elevate it. But I believe all sports should do that. When I was a competitive cyclist, I'd get back from a race. As soon as I got back, the same day I got back home or the next day, I would put it in the small chain ring and I would just spin really fast and no hills, nothing hard, just high rate of speed with my legs. And wow, my legs felt a lot better. Weird. Well, that was a finisher for cycling, so kind of the same thing. But keep that in mind. It's a great thing. It's never going to hurt anybody. It's not going to hurt your performance. It can only help it. It's not going to injure you. It can only help make you injury resilient. It helps build your mental game for going into higher repetition movements. It also lets you know when stuff starts burning, how many more reps can I get before I can't go anymore. It teaches you a lot of important things that translates to sport, but it's nothing you're going to get hurt on.
I agree with that.
What about you, Jesse?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we don't really Olympic lift with sport athletes outside of CrossFitters. CrossFitters for sure. But even in the case of Justin Ellie Trista, I mean, that's way more on Adam than it is on me. Like he teaches a Bergner strength seminar. He's on it for that sort of stuff. I'm feeding into that system, but I'm not directly programming those pieces. And the reason we wouldn't use it outside of the things we don't do as a principle are things that are slow on their value uptick. So on the premise of I might get an athlete 2 to 3 sessions a week, I can't spend all of that time building the skills of movements like snatch, clean, and jerk. And the other one I would say would be muscle ups. Because for me, when I weigh in on what is the objective of this, if I had an athlete get injured on those 3 things and I had to go to the other coaching staff and say, hey, such and such got injured doing muscle ups today. And that coach said, why were they doing muscle ups? I feel like it'd be hard to be honest about justifying them, only because there's just so many other elements that you can incorporate that don't have the exposure or the training leg to get the athlete the results that you desire quicker, safer, and more effectively. And I feel the same way because of accommodating resistance about the Olympic lifts. Like if your sport does not have the Olympic lifts in them, like CrossFit does, then if I'm going to spend time teaching the snatch and clean and jerk, which I mean, I can do this. I just look at how long that's going to take, the commitment to improving range of motion, et cetera, et cetera. Like I teach it to all of our CrossFit athletes. both in general and the higher level. But as a sport athlete, you're like, forget it. Like, I mean, we're going to speed squat, we're going to speed pull, and we're going to use the bands and the bench press. And for us, I mean, the uptick on that is 3 weeks, 4 weeks maybe before athletes producing pretty tangible results that are pretty clearly able to be metriced via, something like the rep 1 for reading velocity, or a Tendo unit. It's rep. You can test it against jumps. I mean, that's often what the Olympic lifts are being applied to sport athletes for, is the athlete needs a increase in their vertical jump. And you're like, well, just tell me that directly. Like, don't tell me they need to be better at the Olympic lifts. Just tell me if you want a better vertical or a better box jump, that's what you want, because I can get there quicker, safer, and utilize training time much more efficiently without them. But again, I'm not saying I don't like them. I mean, I love the Olympic lifts. They're fantastic to watch. I've had nothing but excellent conversations with coaches like Adam Neiffer and Coach Bergner when I've had the opportunity. Like, those are great guys in an awesome sport. But for me personally, with my skill set and everything else, those are the things I kind of drop. For things that we definitely do, I mean, COVID was a really good opportunity to see what happens when you pull some things out. And when we pulled out belt squats, glute ham raise, and reverse hyper, we clearly saw a diminished result as a group of lifters and athletes. And so those things for me are, I mean, we're doing those once or twice every week for sure, in one variation form or another. But belt squat, hypers, and GH raise have continued to help us be successful both in performance result and in injury prevention. So outside of the primary pieces, those would be things that we're like, we always do those.
I agree with everything Jesse said. I mean, that's exactly the way I look at Olympic lifting. Love the sport. I think it's amazing. But you have to also realize, like, if you're working with kids in high school, junior high, the majority of the kids on the team are going to be low-level athletes. Maybe you can be a phenomenal coach and you have one or two assistant coaches that help you. But if they're not a high level and technique for Olympic lifting, you're going to have low-level coaches teaching a high level technique movement to a low-level athlete. Isn't exactly a recipe for success. And like Jesse said, how long does it take the athlete to get good at that movement? And how much faster and stronger could they have been if they were just training simple movements that have been easy for your assistant coaches to help you with, easier for the athletes to pick up? And we can now use accommodating resistance that has a better translation into sport. Since quarter extremity acceleration is what we need to optimize, the only way we can really truly optimize that is by use of accommodating resistance. So makes it pretty simple.
Think about what happens with that. Now you do dynamic effort days with your squat. Now what happens? Now your back squat or your box squat goes up. Your 1 rep max goes up. So now you're midline stabilizing more load. You're producing more thirst at a higher load. And then that dynamic effort thing goes up. It's, that whole point of that, is strength and conditioning coaches with a speed strength adaptation. So if you can do it other ways, why not?
So think about football, right? Let's say you have a kid, and we'll say an easy number. I think an easy number for high school kids, 50 pounds a year in a squat. I think that's ridiculously easy. But that's 200 pounds over 4 years, okay, added onto their squat, okay? And I think that's a very low number. I'm just going to say that number, right? By the 4th year, this kid is doing 200 pounds more on a squat, which means on his speed days, he has 100 more pounds of bar weight, not including accommodating resistance. So if he does 12 sets of 2 or 9 sets of 3, that's like 12 sets of 2 is like 12 plays in football, right? He's now moving at the same rate of speed he did 4 years ago with another 100 pounds in the bar.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you get
and heavier band percentage.
And heavier band percentage. And that's how you get someone to directly translate into their sport, a usable speed for their sport, and you actually can have a measurable way they're improving. If they can handle 100 pounds more bar weight and a higher percentage of band tension for 9 sets of 3 or 12 sets of 2 with 30-second rest periods, they also have to be in better conditioning as well. So it's all synergetic.
Yeah, that's what I was saying to you guys earlier before we got started, is working with training out with Justin Ellie while we're setting up their new space this last weekend. Had another athlete work in with us on stuff, and powerlifting experience, powerlifting background, but done this way was just the volume intensity was just not what they were used to, and then just hammered them, and they packed it in three movements into 7. And I think that's why there's such an application. Like I would say, because when people say conjugate powerlifting, and you're like, is powerlifting valuable for all athletes? You're like, I mean, depends how you do it. Mm-hmm. I think the conjugate system and the implementation of squat, bench, dead to athletes has a massive ability to have a positive impact on sport athletes, for sure. I think if you're sticking to more traditional powerlifting, I would probably say no, because I just think you're running the same problems. Not enough movement pattern variance, too high of repetitions on those primary pieces, not enough variations in the implements you're using, so overexposure to those, and joint injury risk goes up, et cetera, et cetera.
You're not going to train special strengths. You're not going to train enough special exercises, you're not going to fix your movement faults, so
you're not going to get the data. You're not going to collect the information. You're not going to see those things where suddenly you look at something they thought they'd be real good at and they're not. And you're like, oh shit, like this is great. This is a good opportunity. Like because of the constant assessment of those pieces.
We have more variation than anybody in the world, which also means we get to collect more data than anybody else. And that's just a fact. It's just how it is.
All right. What do you reckon? Button it up?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
So I guess overall, if we recap the last 1 hour and a half-ish, collect the data and information. Pay attention to your athlete. Pay attention to your athlete and constantly be assessing. Collect that information from the athlete, from other coaching staff, anyone else they work with, and not just in the movements that they're using for their training, but also look at video of their sport, see how they move around the gym, see how they mobilize and recover. Like all of that is telling you some bit of information that may be able to be applied to optimizing their program. Don't worry about being too complex. Just build a good athlete initially. Look to make them better. Look for those big holes in the games and fill in, like Shane said, fill in the big holes first, worry about the little ones later and down the road. I mean, there's always room to grow. But if you can make a 10% positive change, take that over a 2% positive change, no matter how cool that 2% change looks. And know your movement selection. Like if you've got limited time with the athlete, everything has to count. So anything you do, if another coach was watching you do it and said, why did you choose that? And why did you choose those sets and those reps and on that time frame? That you'd be able to be like, well, I mean, here's my reason. If you disagree or feel differently, that's okay. But you should have an answer for why you're making the choices that you're making with every athlete you work with. And be accountable. Be accountable for that athlete's success and results, and be accountable when that athlete's coming up short. Be willing to talk to other coaches, learn and reach out. I mean, man, I've said it a lot of times, but Shane's been a huge mentor to me for a lot of years. I'm very appreciative to have the opportunity to chat with both of you guys, and have friends, like you two and Adam Knifer and that sort of stuff. I've always tried to be as humble as possible to make sure that I'm, challenging my own beliefs. And then, I mean, I'm only attached to the end result being positive. So however we get there, if I get there in a straighter line or with other things or things that weren't my ideas, doesn't make a lick of difference to me. Anything you guys want to add before we wrap?
End result is all I want. That's how I improve people's quality of life. And so as a scientist, you should always try to disprove what you're doing. The more you just try to disprove it, either the more you learn about your own system and you can excel that system, or you find the next new thing that's even better, and that's even better for you. So,
yeah. Chris?
Great recap. I think, the data, you can't get enough of it, and be more comfortable with fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. As a final wrap then, back to the very start is we're friendly, nice people. Don't be afraid to like us. And show that via Instagram, following us or what do people say? Sub us on YouTube. I think maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Maybe I'm using that wrong. But it helps. It does help. Reach out. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, queries, or perchance a conundrum for us. I'm probably more interested in those than the other two, but I'm all ears. We will help you in any way we can, and we'll get this one out in the next podcasts coming out. What are we on? 7 now? 8, 9, 10. Big things to come. Pretty exciting. Sweet. Thanks, boys.
Thank you.
Conjugate Nation Podcast.